I don't think I ever loved camping, not like some people do. My family did it every single summer, almost like a tradition we couldn't back out of. I was the youngest of 3, and my parents were the kind who believed in making memories, whether we wanted to or not. Our vacations were usually a mix of tents, bugs, cold food, long hikes, and those thin nylon sleeping bags that never really kept the cold out. Most summers, we bounced between a few favorite spots: Virginia Beach, Westmoreland, and Assateague Island. Virginia Beach was okay if we got a campsite near the boardwalk. Westmoreland was miserable, hot, buggy, and full of loud neighbors who stayed up all night playing music. But Assateague was different. If you've never been, it's this barrier island off the coast of Maryland and Virginia. It's beautiful, wide beaches, salt marshes, and these wild ponies that just roam around freely like they own the place. They're not scared of you. They'll dig through your cooler, tear open your trash bags, and even try to walk right through your camp if they feel like it. I guess that's part of the charm, but back then, it didn't feel charming. It felt like living in someone else's territory. This one trip, I think I was maybe 10 or 11, it stands out more than any other. Even now, I remember it more clearly than I want to. We had arrived at Assateague in the early afternoon. It was late June, and the weather had turned hot and sticky already, the kind that makes your clothes cling to you the second you step out of the car. The mosquitoes were already out in full force, and there was this thin crust of salt on everything. The picnic tables, the fire ring, even the sand itself felt sharper. My dad was in one of his moods, the kind where he barked orders and took the setup way too seriously. We had 2 tents, a larger one where my parents would sleep and a smaller one that my brother, sister, and I would share. But that trip, for whatever reason, they changed it up. My sister, who was the oldest, had gotten permission to bring a friend, and they claimed the small tent. That meant I'd be sleeping in the big tent with my parents, tucked into a corner like an afterthought. They picked a site that looked normal enough: scrubby trees, sandy ground, maybe 50 yards from the beach trail. It wasn't deep into the brush like some sites are, but it had just enough cover that you could feel like you weren't being watched all the time. We set up both tents, rolled out the mats, set up the camp stove, and stacked firewood nearby. As the sun started dipping down behind the dunes, you could hear the ponies farther off, their hooves muffled in the sand as they moved along the trails. We made hot dogs over the fire and tried to enjoy the breeze, but the air was so thick and damp it felt like it stuck to your skin. Once the sun dropped all the way, the mosquitoes came out even harder, and we retreated into our tents pretty fast. I remember lying there on my back, my sleeping bag half unzipped, trying to ignore the sticky sweat collecting behind my neck. My dad's snoring picked up first, followed by the rustling sound of my mom flipping over every few minutes. Sometime in the middle of the night, must have been after midnight, I woke up. I didn't sit up or move at first. I just opened my eyes. The inside of the tent was dark, except for this pale bluish glow filtering through the mesh window from the moon outside. It was bright enough that I could see shapes, outlines, shadows. I rolled to one side and saw my mom sitting upright, totally still, not moving, not looking around, just frozen like a statue. At first, I thought she was sleepwalking or something, but then I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. Just outside the tent, standing right at the mesh, was the shape of a person, or what I thought was a person. It was hunched forward slightly, head tilted. I could see wiry, stringy hair hanging down around the face, and the way the figure stood, quiet, unmoving, staring into the tent, made the hair on my neck stand up instantly. It looked like an old woman, at least that's what my brain decided in the moment. Thin, bony, with long arms and hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in years. The moonlight hit it just enough to make the silhouette real. Too real. She wasn't saying anything. She wasn't moving, just watching. I could feel panic rise in my chest like heat. I remember holding my breath, heart thudding in my ears, trying to understand what I was looking at. My mom still hadn't moved. She just sat there, stiff, her hands clutching the edge of her sleeping bag. Then I shifted slightly, and the sound must have been enough. The figure jolted back and spun away fast, faster than I expected for what looked like an old woman. She moved on 4 legs, not 2. And that's when I realized it wasn't a woman at all. It was a pony. One of the wild ascetic ponies. The angle, the hair, the stillness. Everything had tricked my brain in the worst way. She'd been standing so close to the tent that her head had been level with the mesh, and the way her mane hung down had made it look like tangled human hair. But when she turned, I saw the full shape of her body, the low-slung belly, the sway in her back, the powerful haunches. She took off down the path toward the beach, her hooves kicking up sand. My mom finally exhaled. I don't know how long she'd been holding her breath, but I could hear it now, this long, shaky exhale. She lay back down, and I followed suit, my heart still thumping hard in my chest. I didn't sleep much the rest of that night. In the morning, the others were already outside making breakfast when we unzipped our tent. My dad was complaining about something, probably the fire not starting fast enough, and my sister's friend was trying to keep the sand out of the frying pan. I looked around the site. Hoof prints were everywhere. Some of them ran right between the tents. Our cooler had been knocked over, and the bungee cords we'd used to secure it were stretched and hanging off one side like spaghetti. My sister found bite marks on the plastic lid of the container we'd kept trail mix in. The ponies had raided our site, probably just looking for food on their way to the beach. We hadn't known that we'd set up our tents right on one of their usual paths. They weren't afraid of people. They'd go wherever they pleased. That was the thing about Assateague. It wasn't a campground in the normal sense. It was their land. You were just borrowing space for a couple nights, and if they wanted to walk through it, they would. Still, I couldn't shake that image. The silhouette at the mesh window. The stillness. The way it had looked human for those few awful seconds. My brain had latched onto it, and even though I knew what it really was, part of me still felt like I'd seen something else. Something older, wilder, something that didn't care if I was a kid, or if we were just there for a few nights of family bonding. Later that day, we went down to the beach like we always did. The sand was blistering hot, and the breeze only helped a little. We kept our bags up on the dunes to avoid the tide, and we spent hours in the surf. But I kept looking back toward the campsite, half expecting to see her again. The shape, the hair, the quiet stare. That night, we tied down the cooler even tighter, stuffed the trash bag into the car, and double-zipped the tents. My dad even laid out a makeshift barrier of folding chairs and firewood between the tents, thinking it might deter anything from coming through again. Didn't. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of metal clanging. The ponies were back. I didn't look this time. I just lay there, listening to them huff and grunt, their hooves clicking against the asphalt of the nearby trail, the snort of air from their nostrils as they pawed at the chairs. One of them must have bumped into the firewood pile, because I heard it crash and scatter. My dad didn't get up. No one did. We just waited for them to pass. They always passed. Eventually, in the morning, it was the same story. Hoof prints, new teeth marks. One of our beach towels had been dragged 20 feet and trampled in the sand. My sister laughed about it, said they were just hungry, just curious. Maybe they were, but something about their confidence unsettled me. They weren't scared. They didn't hesitate, and when they wanted something, they just came and took it. That trip ended after 3 nights. We packed up the tents, shook out the sand, dumped the leftover food into the trash cans up by the ranger station. On the way out, we passed a group of ponies standing in the middle of the road. A line of cars waited for them to move. They didn't care. They stood there chewing, tails flicking, eyes half-lidded like they owned the place. And maybe they did. Even now, all these years later, I don't think about the beach or the campfires when someone brings up that trip. I don't think about swimming or hiking or chasing sand crabs. I think about that shape outside the tent. That second where I believed, really believed, that someone was standing there, silently watching me sleep. And I think about how easily my mind filled in the blanks, how quickly fear can twist something natural into something else entirely. But the truth is simpler than that. We camped where we didn't belong. We pitched our tents across their path. We left our food out. We invited them in whether we realized it or not. It wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was just a pony, and somehow that makes it even harder to forget. I never really gave much thought to animals on military bases before I enlisted. Back home, deer were timid and bolted at the snap of a twig. Raccoons skittered off the moment you looked at them wrong, even if they were raiding your trash can. But after a few months on base, I started to realize something strange. Animals on military posts weren't like the ones I grew up around. They were bolder, smarter, and somehow they just acted like they knew we couldn't do anything about them. It was Fort Sill where I first noticed it. The deer walked around like they owned the place. They didn't bother to run when we marched past them in formation. They didn't flinch when the gunfire from the range cracked through the air. They just grazed along the field, heads barely rising. Sometimes one would glance at us like we were the ones out of place, then go right back to nibbling the grass like we were nothing. We were told not to touch the wildlife, not to interact with them, not to feed them. So they got used to us fast, and once they realized we couldn't hurt them, it was like they just started pushing boundaries. I once saw a big buck just stand in the middle of the road during a convoy drill. An entire line of Humvees had to idle and wait for him to move. He didn't. He stood there, watching the drivers, like he was daring someone to do something. After about 3 or 4 minutes, he finally walked off slow and deliberate, like he was letting us know it was his decision to move. But deer were only half the problem. The raccoons, that was something else entirely. I'll never forget the first time I really noticed one. It was late fall, chilly enough that we had our fleece liners under our camo and our gloves stuffed in our sleeves. We were out in the field for a 3-day exercise. I don't remember which training area we were in, but it was one of those spots with woods on 3 sides and a long dirt road running down the middle. They had us sleeping in the backs of LMTVs, those big, green trucks with the canvas covers over the beds, and our gear was crammed in with us. The nights were the worst, cold, cramped, and pitch black. No lights, no fires, no noise. They gave us MREs for dinner, as usual, and most guys tore them open, picked out what they wanted, and left the rest somewhere in their gear or tossed it under their ponchos. It wasn't great for hygiene, but no one cared. We were just trying to get through it. Anyway, sometime after midnight, I woke up because I heard something moving around near the truck. Not like the wind or some guy getting up to piss. This was a steady, deliberate sound like rummaging. I stayed quiet, listening, thinking maybe it was one of the NCOs doing a check. But then I heard a crunch, the unmistakable sound of a cracker or a cookie pack being crushed. I sat up just enough to peek through the flap at the back of the LMTV. It was too dark to see anything clearly, but I could hear more of them now. Soft steps on gravel, the rustle of plastic, something heavy thumping against the tailgate. Then a low hiss that got my attention. Not the normal kind of hiss an animal makes when it's startled. This was different, confident almost. I slid forward to get a better look and caught a brief glint in the dark. 2 eyes, reflecting light from the moon. Close, way too close. I froze. My heart was going fast now, and I reached around for my red lens flashlight. But before I could grab it, all hell broke loose. Someone near the front of the truck, one of the drill sergeants, I think, must have seen something or heard the raccoons because there was a shout, followed by a bang. Not a real gunshot, but loud enough. It sounded like blanks fired from an M16, rapid bursts echoing off the trees. Then came the sound of panic. Not from us, but from the raccoons. I swear to God, I've never heard animals make noises like that. Screeches and growls, things crashing and tumbling over. I crawled to the back of the LMTV in time to see 4 raccoons leaping off the tailgate, hauling ass into the woods. One of them had a whole MRE box clutched in its front legs. I swear it was running on 2 feet for a second. The sergeant was still shouting, stomping around the clearing, pointing his rifle at nothing. He looked half crazed, and when someone shined a flashlight his way, we saw his expression, wide-eyed, breathing hard. You'd think he'd just fought off a bear. That became the running joke for weeks. Big bad raccoons taking off with our meals like it was a planned raid. But the thing is, it wasn't really a joke. Not deep down, because over the next few field exercises we kept seeing them. Not just raccoons but possums, skunks, feral cats. They'd come out as soon as the sun dipped below the trees. They didn't care about us. You could stomp your boots, shout, wave your arms, they barely flinched. We started to realize these animals were living on base full-time. They'd grown up around soldiers. Gunfire didn't scare them. Flashlights didn't scare them. People didn't scare them. They learned that the field meant food, that MREs got left open, that people dropped trail mix or peanut butter packets or full damn entrees just to avoid eating them. It was like they had a whole routine mapped out. One night, I stayed awake after lights out just to see what would happen. I was lying under my poncho near the wood line, listening. Sure enough, about 20 minutes after the last guy turned in, they came out. First one, then another, then more. It was like they had shifts. They moved fast, ducking under trucks, jumping onto gear, slipping through tarps. I saw one raccoon unzip a ruck pocket. I'm not kidding. It pawed at the zipper and worked it open, then reached in and pulled out a Pop-Tart. They were coordinated, too. One would be watching while the other two grabbed stuff, like a squad. After that, guys started trying to secure their gear better. We stacked our food in sealed crates, tied up our packs, even rigged up 550 cord to keep flaps shut. But it didn't help much. They'd still get in somehow. Once I watched one climb up a tree and jump down onto a hanging food bag like it had done it 100 times before. I started feeling uneasy during one particular exercise up in the hills. The area was remote, rough terrain, lots of tall grass and brush. We were there for a 4-day field problem simulating combat conditions. That meant minimum sleep, eating on the go, constant movement. First night out there, we had barely set up when one of the raccoons came sniffing around. Big one, scarred face, missing half an ear. It walked right into our perimeter like it owned the place. One of the guys tried throwing a rock at it. It dodged and kept coming. I watched it nose around our packs, pawing at the straps. It looked right at us. It wasn't scared. Not at all. Next night, it brought friends. 2 more raccoons, maybe younger, maybe smaller. They worked in tandem, circling the tents, checking under ponchos. I kept thinking about how calm they were. Too calm. It was like they'd spent years learning what we'd do, how we'd react, what our weaknesses were. I don't know how to explain it without sounding crazy, but it felt like they were studying us. Third night, it escalated. We had just racked out, dead tired from a forced march, when one of the trucks shook violently. At first, we thought someone was inside, maybe having a fit or messing around. But then a guy shouted, and we all jumped up, grabbing our gear. I was closest, so I ran to the truck and yanked the flap open. Inside, chaos. Someone had already fired off a few blanks, probably out of panic. The noise was deafening. Flashlights swung wildly, and in the middle of it all, raccoons. 6 of them. I counted. 6. Tearing open boxes, clawing through packs, dragging food out by the armful. Not scraps, full meals. They didn't stop when we opened the flap. They didn't bolt. They finished what they were doing, then jumped off and scattered into the woods like they had an exit plan ready. They even used the same trail back every time. That was the last night I slept deep in the field without checking everything 3 times. When we got back to the barracks, I asked around. Some of the older guys, career soldiers who'd been to multiple bases, said the same thing. Animals on military posts weren't normal. They were harder, tougher, more confident. One guy swore he saw a raccoon bite through plastic and metal to get at a can of Vienna sausages. Another said he saw a deer follow a soldier around the motor pool for half an hour, just to chew on the straps of his camelback. I never got used to it. I don't think you're supposed to. After I ETS'd and went back home, I expected to see some of that same behavior in local wildlife. I didn't. The raccoons here still run when you step outside. The deer still scatter at headlights. It made me realize just how different things had been. What stuck with me the most, though, wasn't the fear or the discomfort. It was that moment. Seeing raccoons sprinting off with entire MREs under their arms while a fully grown drill sergeant screamed and fired blanks in their wake. It was absurd and hilarious and terrifying all at once. It made you realize that out there, in the field, we weren't always the top of the food chain. Sometimes, you're just another moving piece in an ecosystem that's been adapting to your presence for years. And the raccoons? They've already won. When I look back on that weekend camping trip, I still get a strange, uncomfortable feeling in my chest. I've been on dozens of trips, camping, hiking, even some backcountry stuff, but that one stands out not because of some big disaster or dramatic injury, but because of something smaller, something odd. It all started when my friends Rob and Dan invited me for a weekend at a state park not too far from where we lived. We were all in our late 20s then, working decent jobs, living fairly boring lives, so a couple of days camping sounded like the perfect break. We planned it all pretty quickly. Packed up 2 cars, brought tents, sleeping bags, coolers full of drinks, plenty of snacks, and the usual camp gear. The place we chose was a well-maintained campground. Nothing wild or remote, just simple woodsy lots with picnic tables, fire pits, and a few scattered bathroom buildings with toilets and running water. It wasn't exactly rugged, but we were mostly just looking to relax, grill some food, and drink a few beers by the fire. We arrived Friday afternoon, checked in at the ranger station, and found our site. It was a good spot, shaded, set back a bit from the main road, with a short path leading down to the public bathrooms. The campground wasn't packed, but there were other groups scattered here and there. Families, a few couples, some people with RVs. We set up our tents, cracked open some drinks, and settled in. The evening passed easily. Burgers on the grill, chips and snacks, a big fire once the sun went down. We sat around laughing, telling dumb stories, watching the sparks rise up into the dark. At some point late that night, I decided to head to the bathroom. I took my flashlight and walked down the narrow dirt path, passing through the trees. The bathrooms were small concrete buildings, just a couple of stalls inside, dimly lit, but better than nothing. When I pushed open the door, the first thing I noticed was the smell. A strange mix of damp concrete and something sweet. I stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind me, and that's when I saw it. Sitting on the floor next to one of the sinks was a backpack. It was a normal-looking bag, dark gray, a bit scuffed up, nothing fancy, but it was unzipped, and spilling out of the top were Skittles. Not just a few, piles of them, loose, rainbow-colored candy poured out across the bathroom floor like someone had emptied out bags and bags of them. I stared at it for a long moment, not really sure what I was looking at. Why would someone leave a backpack full of Skittles in the bathroom? I edged closer, shining my flashlight down. There were no other items in the bag, no clothes, no phone charger, no water bottle. Just candy. Some of it had rolled under the sinks, some was crushed underfoot, leaving colorful smears on the concrete. I felt a weird chill crawl up my back. Something about it felt wrong. I finished up quickly, didn't touch the bag, and headed back to camp. I didn't even mention it to Rob or Dan that night. The next morning, I decided to go back, just to see if it was still there. The backpack was gone. The bathroom looked totally normal. Clean floor, no candy, no sign that anything had been there. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I asked a couple of the neighboring campers if they'd noticed anything weird, but nobody had. A family camped 2 sites over said they'd been out on a hike all morning. An older couple nearby just shrugged, saying they hadn't even used that bathroom building. Later that afternoon, Rob and Dan and I decided to walk one of the nearby trails. It was a simple loop, about 4 miles, winding through some pine forest and then circling back toward the campground. We packed some snacks, water, and set off. About halfway through the hike, we stopped to rest near a clearing. That's when I noticed something off the side of the trail. Tucked between 2 trees, half hidden by the underbrush, was a crumpled candy wrapper. I stepped closer. It was a Skittles bag. I looked around and saw another, and another. Scattered along the edge of the woods were half a dozen empty or torn Skittles wrappers, faded and weathered like they'd been there a while. I called Rob and Dan over, showed them what I'd found. They laughed it off, joking about some candy-addicted hiker or maybe some kids messing around. But I felt uneasy. It wasn't just 1 or 2 wrappers. It was a trail. We followed the scattered wrappers deeper into the trees, away from the main path. The woods were quiet, the air still. No birds calling, no wind rustling the branches. Just the faint crunch of our boots on the ground. After about 10 minutes, we reached a small clearing. In the middle of it, almost perfectly centered, was another backpack. It was a different one, this time dark blue with one of the straps torn. and spilling out of it were more Skittles. Loose candy scattered in the grass, some crushed, some faded by the sun. The three of us just stood there, looking at it. None of us said anything, but I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. This was weird, too weird. We didn't touch the bag. We backed away, retraced our steps, and made our way back to the main trail. That night, back at camp, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I looked into the trees, I thought I saw movement, just a flicker of something slipping out of sight. When I went to the bathroom again before bed, I took a good look around. No backpacks, no candy. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't relax. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a faint sound, a soft rustling just outside the tent. I lay there holding my breath, listening. The sound moved slowly past, like footsteps crunching softly over the dirt and needles. I didn't move. Eventually, the sound faded away. In the morning, I got up early and walked the edge of the campsite. And there, near the trees, I found something. A single red Skittle sitting in the dirt. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. It was smooth and cold in my hand. I tossed it into the trees and went back to pack up. We left that day, cutting the trip short. None of us really talked about it. Maybe it was nothing, just coincidence or some strange prank, or maybe we were overreacting. But something about the whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. Even now, years later, I think about that weekend. The backpacks, the candy, the strange, silent woods. I don't know who left those things or why. I don't know what we nearly stumbled into following that trail, but I'm glad we stopped when we did. I haven't been back to that campground since. And when people ask why, I just tell them I've got no reason to go back. But the truth is, every time I think about it, I remember that feeling that something out there, just beyond the trees, was watching us. And I'm not sure I want to know what it was. I've always liked raccoons. I know they can be a nuisance, especially when it comes to trash, but something about the way they waddle around like little masked burglars makes them look funny to me. Kind of cute even, but that feeling changed after one weekend camping trip. I took the trip by myself. I like being alone sometimes, especially out in nature. There's a calm that comes from being surrounded by trees and away from constant noise. I drove up to a small campground about 2 hours north of home, a place I'd been to a couple times before. It wasn't too remote, but far enough off the beaten path that I could expect some real quiet. No cell service out there, and only a few cleared spots for tents. Usually, only a handful of people camp there at any given time, and that weekend I was the only one. I arrived around midday on a Friday. The air smelled like pine and dry leaves. The sun was out, but the wind was sharp, the kind that rustles through trees constantly and sounds like moving water. I picked the same spot I'd used before, a flat patch near a tree line with a view of the slope leading down to a small creek. There was a designated fire pit, a basic wooden picnic table, and one of those metal bear-proof trash bins that locked shut with a latch. I set up my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and unpacked the gear I'd need. I kept my food in a cooler and secured anything with scent in the bin. I'm careful about that kind of thing. I like animals, but I know they're always looking for an easy meal. That first day was peaceful. I hiked a few miles down a trail that looped around the creek, came back in the late afternoon, and made a small fire. I cooked up a couple sausages over the flames and sat back in my camp chair with a flashlight and a paperback. It got cold fast once the sun went down, but I was prepared. I had my warm layers, gloves, and a good sleeping bag. I fell asleep to the sound of the wind pushing through the trees. Somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up. Couldn't say why. I didn't hear anything in particular at first, but something felt off. You know that feeling when you suddenly wake up and your body knows something's different? I sat still and listened. Then I heard the sound of metal clanging. It was faint, but it came from where the trash bin stood near the edge of the site. I figured it was a raccoon. I'd seen them around before, and they had a habit of getting into things. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out, and sure enough, in the dim moonlight, I saw a shape moving near the bin. It was a raccoon, or at least I thought it was. It was hard to tell from that distance, but it had the right shape. What threw me off was what it was doing. The bin was tipped over on its side, and trash was scattered all over the place. But the bin had been latched shut before I went to bed. It was one of those heavy-duty kinds bolted to a concrete slab to keep it from being tipped easily. The raccoon must have really worked at it. I lay back down, figuring I'd clean it up in the morning. When I got up at dawn, I saw the full mess. The bin hadn't just been tipped over. One side of the concrete base had a deep groove dug under it, like the raccoon had tunneled just enough to shift the weight and make the bin fall. I've never heard of a raccoon doing something like that. I'd always thought of them as clever, sure, but not calculated. It was a strange kind of unsettling, standing there with trash around my boots and realizing that some little animal had done all that work just to get inside. I cleaned it up, stuffed everything back in the bin, and relocked the latch. I figured I'd double-check before sleeping the next night to make sure it was still shut tight. The rest of the day was quiet. I took a longer hike, made a simple dinner, and kept the fire going a bit later into the evening. There was something about what happened the night before that had left me with a kind of itch in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake it, though I couldn't explain exactly what bothered me. Just the way it had dug under the bin. It seemed too precise. That night, before crawling into the tent, I checked the trash bin twice. The latch was secure. I'd even placed a heavy rock next to the base where it had dug before, just as a kind of test. I thought maybe the raccoon would try again, and I wanted to see what it would do. I woke again in the middle of the night. This time I heard rustling, not just metal. Something was moving through the brush near the trees. I lay still and listened. Then came a deep thump, like something hitting the bin hard, followed by dragging, metal scraping concrete. I got up slowly, slipped on my boots, and stepped out of the tent. The fire was long dead. The air was still cold. I used my flashlight and scanned the area. The bin was on its side again. Trash spread farther than the night before. But the thing that stopped me cold was the rock I'd placed. It had been moved, not just rolled aside. It had been picked up, moved several feet, and dropped on its side. That rock weighed close to 40 pounds. I'd had to use both hands and a bit of effort to get it where I'd wanted it. Now I was really confused. I walked up slowly, light sweeping side to side. No sign of anything alive nearby. I didn't hear anything, not even the usual night insects. Just silence and the faint sound of trees creaking in the breeze. I cleaned it again in the morning, this time a bit shaken. I looked at the ground near the bin. There were marks, smudges in the dirt. Not full paw prints, just disturbed earth. The kind of thing that could have been made by a raccoon, but could have just as easily been anything else. I considered leaving. I really did, but I was trying to push through that irrational fear. I kept telling myself it was just a raccoon. Clever one, maybe even a group of them. Maybe it wasn't that unusual for one to be that persistent. Maybe the rock wasn't as heavy as I thought. I stayed. That third night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking, kept listening. Every small sound had me holding my breath. I never heard the bin fall that night, but I still got up before the sun. And when I stepped out, I saw that the bin was gone. Not just tipped, gone. I walked over to where it had stood. The bolts had been ripped out of the concrete. They were still in place, meaning the bin had been wrenched free somehow. Drag marks led into the woods about 10 feet and then stopped. I stood there, trying to understand what I was seeing. A metal trash bin, heavy, latched shut, was just gone. Like something had lifted it and carried it away. Or something had dragged it far enough that it was no longer anywhere near the site. I didn't go into the woods after it. I don't know why. I told myself it wasn't worth it. But the truth is, I was scared. Something had been coming back to my camp each night. Something strong enough to pull bolts from concrete and carry off a 100-pound container. I packed up everything in an hour. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't even take down the tent carefully. I just yanked the stakes, shoved it all in the back of the car, and drove out. On the drive home, my mind kept trying to find a simple answer. Maybe it wasn't a raccoon. Maybe it was a bear. But I hadn't seen any bear prints, and the area wasn't known for them. Maybe a person? But who would do that? Who would sneak out into the woods just to mess with a bin 3 nights in a row? And why take it with them? I got home, threw everything into the garage, and sat inside with all the lights on for hours. The next day, I checked the campsite online. It was still listed as open. No notes about bear activity. No alerts about missing gear. Nothing. A few days later, I drove past a neighbor's house and saw a raccoon on the sidewalk, picking at an old sandwich wrapper. It looked up at me with those shiny black eyes, like it didn't care I was there. And I thought about that bin. I thought about how I used to think raccoons were just little masked burglars. Now I'm not so sure. I've always liked camping alone. I started when I got out of the army. The woods gave me space I couldn't find anywhere else. I never cared much for campgrounds or places where you can hear cars on the road or dogs barking in the distance. I wanted to go where it was just me and the trees and the quiet. This trip was supposed to be 4 days, nothing special. I'd mapped out a spot a few hours north of where I live. It was near an old fire road, long overgrown, that led up through some high ridges and small valleys. I'd been there once years ago during a winter hike and remembered the area had good elevation and thick tree cover. That's all I need. I parked off the shoulder where a gravel line disappeared into the woods. From there, I hiked in about 10 miles before I even started looking for a place to stop. I wanted to be far off any trails, deep enough in that I wouldn't hear another person. The weather was good, clear skies, cool air, no rain in the forecast. My gear was standard: Alice pack, tarp, tent, jet boil, water filter, rope, axe, map, GPS, the usual emergency kit. Nothing fancy. I knew how to live off very little. I found a small clearing near a dry creek bed. No animal tracks, no game trails, no signs of other campers. There was a dead pine tree nearby I could use for firewood and a few large rocks that worked as a windbreak. It was perfect. I made camp, ate some beans and rice, and settled in. That first night was uneventful. I slept like a rock, woke up early with the sun, and did a slow loop of the area, looking for landmarks. Just ridges, dry brush, and a lot of trees. Then I climbed a low rise to get a look at the surrounding terrain, and that's when I saw them. 3 goats. They were about 100 yards away, moving slowly between the trees. Big ones, shaggy, colored white and brown and black. No bells, no collars. They didn't look feral exactly, but they weren't clean either. I watched them for a few minutes. They walked slow, sticking close together, heads down, like they were grazing or following a trail I couldn't see. It was strange, but I didn't think too much of it. There's a lot of farmland in upstate New York. Sometimes people raise goats and sheep. Once in a while, animals get loose or are left behind when people move. I figured that's all it was, just some goats. That night, I heard something in the woods. Light movement, branches cracking. Nothing heavy, so I didn't think bear. Sounded more like steps, but uneven. A step, then a pause. A scratch. Another step. Maybe a raccoon or a deer. Still, it was close enough that I sat up, pulled on my headlamp, and scanned outside the tent. Nothing. Just trees and dark. I clicked the lamp off and waited. Listened. Heard one more faint crunch. Then silence. I went back to sleep. The next morning, I found tracks about 15 feet from my tent. Hoof marks. Not deer. Wider, more circular. Goat. 3 sets. They'd come right up near my site, circled the rock ring where I'd had the fire, and moved off again. It was weird, but not alarming. Goats are curious. Maybe they smelled food or just wandered in. But something about how close they came, and the fact that I didn't hear them approach, only move away, made me uneasy. That day I stayed near camp, collected wood, refilled water, fixed the tent fly. The sky was overcast, and the temperature dropped a little. I didn't see the goats again, but just before sundown, I got the feeling that something was watching me. It wasn't anything I could see, just that old instinct, the one that makes your skin pull tight and your ears strain for sounds. It came and went, but it stayed long enough that I felt the need to check the perimeter. I walked a slow, quiet circle around my site with my knife in hand, scanning the trees. Still nothing. That night, the noises came back. It started with small hoof sounds on rock, then a low bleating, not loud, just once. A sound like a tired door hinge, far off. Then nothing. I sat in the dark, headlamp off, listening. I could hear my own heart beating. Then a shuffle of movement right near the edge of the camp, just outside the firelight. I stayed still, didn't make a sound. The hoofsteps moved again. Something brushed against my tent wall, low and deliberate. I grabbed the axe and unzipped the door fast, swept the light outside. There was nothing, but I heard something move away fast, crunching through leaves and snapping twigs. I followed the sound 10 steps into the dark, light bouncing over the brush. Still nothing, just the quiet again. Back inside the tent, I stayed awake for hours. I never saw them, but I knew they'd been there. I could still smell them. A dry, dusty, animal smell. Not like a dog, not like a deer. Earthy, but sharp. And I swore I could feel something still out there, waiting just beyond the reach of my light. I got up at sunrise and checked the area. Tracks were everywhere, deeper than before. They'd come right up to the tent again. One even left a small scrape mark across the fabric. I found a bit of hair snagged on a broken pine branch, thick, coarse, off-white, definitely goat. And then I found the prints near the fire pit. One of them had stood there, just stood, not moving for a long time. The hooves had dug a small trench into the soil. There were little gouges in the dirt, like the thing had shifted its weight again and again without taking a step, facing directly at my tent. It hadn't just passed through. It had watched me. That was the third day. I thought about breaking camp, but it would have taken me most of the day to get back to the road. And I hadn't seen anything truly threatening. Just goats. Strange behavior, sure, but nothing dangerous. Still, I moved my tent up the ridge a bit, put my back to a rock wall so nothing could come up from behind. I made a tighter fire ring and kept the axe beside me. I also moved all my gear inside the tent and strung some light cord with metal rings around the perimeter, just enough that I might hear if something bumped it. The sun went down fast behind the ridge. I didn't cook dinner, just ate a cold bar and sat there watching the woods. Around midnight, they came back. I heard them one by one, hooves on dry ground, soft, careful steps. I counted at least 4, then 5, then 6. I stayed still, light off, listening. I could hear breathing, low, wet sounds. One came close to the cord I'd strung. I heard it stop. Then I heard something sniff the air, close. So close I could feel the exhale through the tent wall. I clenched my fists, kept breathing slow. The axe was in my lap. Then I heard a scraping sound, long, slow, like a hoof dragging across the nylon of the tent. I nearly lost it, but I stayed still. The breathing moved away. The steps faded into the dark. After half an hour, I turned on the light and waited another hour. Then I opened the tent and looked out. Nothing, but all the rocks I'd placed near the fire were moved, rearranged in a small ring, not random, like they'd been placed. I barely slept. I packed up everything in the dark and waited for morning. To first light, I started hiking out. I moved fast, shoulders aching under the pack, my feet pounding. I wasn't even stopping to eat or drink, just pushing hard to get back to the fire road. About 2 hours in, I saw them again, on a small ridge just off to the left, standing between some pine trunks. 6 goats, big, still, just watching me. They didn't move, didn't bleat, just stood there staring. I kept moving, didn't look back. Another mile down the trail, I saw them again. Different spot, same number. I kept moving. Every 30 minutes, I saw them, just watching, always from a distance, never close enough to confront, but always there, always silent. It wasn't until I reached the fire road that I stopped seeing them. I didn't stop walking until I was back at the truck. I drove straight home, gear still wet, food untouched. Didn't even stop for gas until I was nearly empty. I just wanted to put as much distance between me and those woods as possible. A week later, I cleaned my gear and noticed something strange. Tucked inside the side pouch of my pack, one I hadn't opened the entire trip, was a chunk of stone. Smooth, round, the size of a golf ball, and tied around it was a thin strip of fabric. Looked like it came from my own tent. I still don't know how it got there. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Sounds stupid. It was stupid, because at the end of the day, it really was just some goats. That's what I keep telling myself. But I haven't been back since. Haven't camped alone either. Somewhere out there, on those ridges, those goats are still watching. Still waiting. They weren't evil. They weren't magic. They didn't have glowing eyes or horns or anything like that. They were just goats. But something about the way they moved, the way they watched, the way they followed, it was worse than anything unnatural. Because it was real. And it was enough. It was about 25 years ago, sometime in early fall, maybe late September. The weather was still good, but the nights were starting to get cold. I remember the leaves were just beginning to turn and the air had that dry, dusty smell of pine needles and dead grass. That weekend, 4 of us went out camping, me, my dad, my cousin Mike, and my Uncle Paul. We were all pretty comfortable in the woods. My dad had taught me how to hunt and fish since I was a kid. Mike and Paul were the same way. We weren't just weekend campers. We'd all spent plenty of nights out in the wilderness. That weekend, we decided to go out into Cowlitz County, Washington, not too far from where we all lived at the time. We had a spot picked out near a logging road that had been mostly overgrown but still drivable with a good truck. It wasn't an official campground, just a little clearing by a ridge where you could pull off and pitch a tent. No one else was out there. That was part of why we liked it. We arrived around noon on a Friday and set up camp. It was a nice spot, open enough to let sunlight in but surrounded on 3 sides by thick forest. There was a good fire pit, probably left over from other hunters, and we cleared out some of the brush to set up our 2 tents. Me and my dad in one, Mike and Paul in the other. We had a small cooler of food, a couple gallons of water, rifles in the truck, and the usual gear. After setting up, we hiked around a bit, not really hunting yet, just scouting. It was quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but we were used to that. Deep forest quiet is different. It's not truly silent. There's always something, wind through the trees, the occasional bird, maybe a squirrel. But there's a kind of pressure to it, like the woods are holding their breath. That night, we got a fire going and cooked some simple food, beans, sausage, and a couple potatoes we wrapped in foil. We all sat around the fire for a couple hours, mostly telling stories, talking about the hike, about work, that kind of thing. It was calm, even peaceful. The kind of night that makes you forget how far you are from anything. It was probably around 10 p.m. when the first weird thing happened. I had just gotten up to take a leak and grabbed my flashlight. It was an old one, a thick metal kind with a dull beam unless the batteries were fresh. I walked off toward the edge of the trees, maybe 30 feet from camp, and while I was out there, I just casually swept the flashlight across the tree line. That's when I saw them. Eyes, reflective, red-looking eyes staring back at me from between the trees. Not close, maybe 40 or 50 feet into the woods, but they were high up, not at the ground like a deer or a raccoon, higher than eye level. I'm about 6 feet tall, and these were above where my head would be. Just 2 pinpoints of light, almost motionless. I stood there a few seconds, not moving, just holding the flashlight beam on them. Then they were gone. Not like they blinked or turned. Just disappeared, like whatever it was backed away slowly. I walked back to the fire without saying anything. I didn't want to sound like a kid spooked by shadows, especially not around my dad or Paul. But I kept looking out into the woods for the rest of the night. After that, we started hearing little things. Soft noises from the woods. Branches snapping, the occasional rustle in the leaves. Normal stuff for a forest, maybe, but it felt off, like it was too close and too frequent. Around midnight, a small rock came flying out of the dark and landed right next to the fire. Not thrown hard, just enough to bounce into the circle and roll. Then a short while later, a stick clattered against one of the camp chairs. We all noticed it. Nobody said anything, but everyone got a little quieter. My Uncle Paul got up and checked the trees with his flashlight. Nothing. No sound of anything running. No eyes this time, just the woods. A few more pebbles and sticks came in over the next hour, always aimed near the fire, never hitting any of us. They weren't big, nothing dangerous, just deliberate, like someone or something was toying with us. We stayed up another hour or so, and then the noises stopped. It got quiet again. We assumed maybe it was raccoons or something like that. Eventually, we put out the fire and went to bed. Me and my dad were in the smaller tent. We had thin sleeping bags and foam pads. The ground was cold and uneven, but I'd slept in worse. I'm a light sleeper, always have been. Every twig snap or wind gust wakes me up. My dad's the same way. I think that night we both drifted in and out of sleep, never really getting comfortable. Around 5 a.m., I woke up again. This time it wasn't a sound that did it. It was the smell. A strong, awful stink, like rotting meat mixed with wet dog and garbage. Thick, musky, oily. I gagged a little and held my breath, trying to figure out if it was coming from inside the tent or outside. Then I heard the footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps, not like a deer or a small animal. This was 2 feet, human-like, but not fast. It crunched through the dry needles and old branches. Crunch, pause, crunch, coming from the side of the tent. My dad sat up too. I felt him shift in his bag, like he was listening hard. Then the steps stopped just outside our tent. A shadow fell across the thin fabric. Not a person, not an animal shape I recognized. I couldn't tell if it was crouching or just standing oddly. Then my dad snapped. He didn't unzip the tent or grab a weapon. He just slammed his hand into the side of the tent wall and shouted as loud as he could, "Get the fuck out of here!" Whatever it was bolted. We heard the steps take off fast into the trees. It moved fast, too fast for someone in boots. Crashed through the brush like it didn't care what it hit. Within seconds, it was gone. The smell lingered for a while. We unzipped the tent and stepped outside. It was still dark, but starting to get a little lighter in the east. The other tent was zipped up. Mike and Paul hadn't woken up, or at least hadn't come out. We looked around the camp with flashlights. No damage, nothing missing, but the air still had that sour, animal stink to it. It wasn't skunk. I know what skunk smells like. This was something else. We stayed up after that. No point going back to sleep. We kept the fire low and didn't say much. Just sat in our jackets and boots, flashlights in hand, waiting for the sun. When it finally got light, we walked around the perimeter of the camp. We didn't find footprints. The ground was too hard in most places. Pine needles, dry leaves, old branches. Nothing to hold a print well. But in one patch of soft earth near the edge of the trees, I saw a partial print. Big, wider than my boot, longer too. Not clear enough to tell what it was, but too big for a human barefoot. Too narrow for a bear. Just a wide, misshapen pad with no real toe marks. That was the only thing we found. We packed up by 9 a.m. None of us said much. Even Mike and Paul, who hadn't heard everything, could tell the mood had changed. On the drive out, we didn't talk about what happened. Not because we were scared exactly, but because we didn't know what to say. It didn't fit into any normal category. I've thought about that night a lot over the years. I've camped since then. I've heard animals in the woods, seen bears, cougars, owls, you name it. Nothing ever felt like that again. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't think it was a monster or anything like that. I think it was something real, something alive. Maybe something rare or not well understood. An animal, maybe, or something closer to human. I don't know. What I do know is this. Those eyes were high off the ground and they didn't blink. Those rocks and sticks weren't falling by accident. And that thing outside our tent, whatever it was, didn't run until it knew we were awake. It was watching, maybe hunting, maybe just curious. But it knew we were there, and it waited until the early morning to get close. I haven't been back to that spot since. I could probably find it again if I tried, but I don't think I want to. Some places feel wrong after something like that. Even if nothing else happens, the memory sticks to the trees like smoke. That was 25 years ago. I still remember that smell, that sound of feet just outside the tent, and those red eyes, way up in the trees, watching from the dark. A few years ago, some friends and I planned a camping trip deep in southern Arizona. We'd all grown up doing hikes and weekend trips out in the desert, so this wasn't anything new to us. But that trip, it's the one that sticks in my head the most, and not in a good way. The area we picked was out past Tucson. Far past. We followed a mix of dirt roads and wash trails until the trucks couldn't go any further without risking getting stuck. Then we hiked the last half mile to a clearing that was quiet, surrounded by tall brush and rock ridges. No cell service, no people, just us, the firewood we brought, and the desert. There were 6 of us in 3 tents. We'd done this kind of trip enough times that everyone knew the drill. We had our coolers packed with food and beer, firewood strapped down in the back of one of the trucks, and the usual random mix of gear. Folding chairs, old lanterns, sleeping bags, a few tarps in case of rain, and at least 2 pistols just in case. You never know what you'll find that far out. We got to the site around 4 p.m., just before the sun started to dip. It was early spring, which meant hot in the day, cold at night. The air had that dry, almost metallic smell that you only get in the desert, the kind that sticks in your nose after a while. We set up quickly, pitched the tents in a rough circle with the fire pit in the middle. Everyone unpacked, unrolled sleeping bags, stacked the food coolers next to one of the vehicles, and hung a trash bag from a dead tree branch a few yards away. Someone cracked open the first beer. That was usually the official start of our camp trips. The first night went fine. Nothing weird. We cooked some meat over the fire, told the usual dumb stories, stared up at the stars. Arizona skies are so wide and empty, you forget the stars are always there. The wind stayed calm, and the only sounds were the fire crackling and the distant rustle of something small in the brush, probably a rabbit or pack rat. We all went to bed around midnight. I shared a tent with 2 others. We were all half drunk and tired, and I remember thinking how good the cold felt against my skin as I lay there. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. There was no moon. At some point during the night, I woke up. I didn't shoot up or gasp. It was more like my body just opened its eyes before I understood why. It was quiet, still. Then I heard it, right outside the tent. Sniffing. Not footsteps, not twigs breaking, just a slow, steady sniff, right against the fabric, like someone trying to smell through it. At first, I thought animal. Bear, maybe. I knew they weren't common in that area, but they're not impossible either. Then maybe coyote. But they don't act like this. Coyotes usually avoid humans unless they're starving, and even then they don't get close to tents. This wasn't fast, frantic sniffing like an animal looking for food. It was slow, focused. There was a rhythm to it. It made the hair on my arms stand up. The sniff moved. It shifted to the side, closer to where my feet were. Then it paused again. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Then I felt one of the other guys in the tent place a hand on my arm. Slowly, lightly. I wasn't the only one awake. A second later, I felt another hand, this time from the other side. No one said anything, but we all knew what was happening. We were all hearing it. The sniffing moved again. It went to the next tent. Crunch of dirt. Then another long sniff. Then nothing. Maybe 30 seconds passed. I held my breath. My muscles were locked. Then came the sound of a zipper. Tent opening fast. Footsteps. Someone from the other tent had jumped out and was yelling, making noise, stomping, trying to scare off whatever was there. A flashlight beam cut through the dark. I heard fast footsteps. Something or someone running away. I unzipped our tent just enough to look out. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. Human. Skinny. Shirtless. Barefoot and covered in dirt. He had been crouched next to one of the coolers, and when the flashlight hit him, he took off into the desert without a word. Not toward a road, just into the brush. One of the guys fired a round into the air. Not to hit him, just to let him know we weren't joking. But by then, he was gone. Vanished. We stood around for a minute, shining flashlights into the scrub brush, but there was nothing to see. No more noise. Just our heavy breathing and the wind picking up a little. We checked the cooler. Stuff had been taken, protein bars, jerky, some bread. One of the backpacks had been rummaged through, but no one had seen this guy approach. and no one had seen where he went. We didn't even argue. Everyone knew what had to be done. We packed everything in 20 minutes, barely speaking. The tents went into the truck beds still half assembled. We doused the fire with sand and peeled out. We drove back through the dirt roads with our high beams on. No one said anything the whole way. I just stared out the window, thinking how easy it would have been for that guy to hurt someone if he'd wanted to. Or worse, just stood there all night watching. We got back to the highway around 4 a.m., hit a gas station, and sat in silence with hot coffee cups in our hands. We didn't call the cops. What would we say? A guy sniffed our tents? Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, we joked about it a little, gave the guy dumb nicknames, tried to convince ourselves it was just a drifter, a crazy person, one-time thing. But a year later, we went back. Not the same spot. We weren't that stupid, but close. Same region, about 10 miles away from the first site. A flatter clearing with a view of a wide dry wash and some boulders. This time, we planned ahead. No tents. We decided we'd all sleep in the vehicles. Truck beds, SUV seats, or cargo areas. Felt safer, harder to approach. Plus, if anything happened, we could just drive. That first night felt fine. Clear sky, slight breeze, nothing unusual. We cooked over the fire again, laughed, drank less this time. Most of us went to sleep by 11. I was in the back of my SUV with my girlfriend. We laid down the seats and padded it with sleeping bags and a foam mat. The back window was cracked open an inch to let in air. I had a blanket over my legs. She was next to me, facing the rear. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke up again. But this time, it wasn't sound that did it. It was light. A beam of white light was shining through the rear window. It wasn't moving, just steady, shining right on my face. My eyes were closed, but I could feel it, even through my eyelids. My heart started pounding. I didn't move. I kept my breathing slow, pretended to be asleep. After a few seconds, I could hear faint footsteps, gravel crunching under soft weight. The light disappeared. I heard it move toward the next vehicle. Then silence again. I opened my eyes a crack, looked toward the front seats. No one inside but us. My girlfriend was breathing shallow, pretending to sleep too. She had felt it too. I heard the footsteps again, this time circling back toward the fire pit. I slowly lifted my head just high enough to look out the side window. There was a man standing by the dead fire. Not a camper, not one of us. He was old, long gray hair, dirty jacket, stiff posture, holding a flashlight low to the ground, just standing there, looking around, watching. He didn't seem lost, didn't call out, didn't ask for help, just stood there for minutes. Eventually, he turned and walked slowly away toward the dry wash, disappearing into the shadows. I waited until I couldn't hear his steps anymore. Then I slid out of the SUV and ran to the nearest truck. Banged on the window. One by one, I woke everyone up. They had seen it too. Half of them had already been awake, just like me. No one wanted to be the first to move. We didn't wait around. We threw everything into the vehicles. Didn't bother folding chairs. Just tossed it all in and left. We drove straight home, sun rising behind us. No one made a sound. That was the last time we camped out there. I still don't know who that man was, or what he wanted. But to this day, I wonder how many nights he's been out there, sniffing tents and shining lights into people's eyes, and how many times people didn't wake up.